We'll be talking about the public housing renewal program and the Chrome Flats demolition. So can everyone please quiet down for our final presentations. So thanks everyone.
Thanks for making the time, and obviously it's a fairly full agenda with important items on. I'll be as quick as I can and happy to take questions on the way through, so I'll move this to be quickly. My name's David Collett. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Housing Renewal Task Force, and we're being charged with the renewal of a number of the large multi-unit sites across Canberra as part of the renewal program. As many of you will understand, Canberra's been well served by public housing in the past, and some of the reasons for that is that it started off at its genesis as government housing rather than welfare housing. It was built for public servants moving from Sydney and Melbourne, and that's meant that it's more broadly distributed across the metropolitan area than is in many suburbs. There's more sites with high value, and there's good levels of public housing in the inner suburbs. The downside, however, is that we've got the oldest housing stock of any jurisdiction in Australia. We do have our own aggregations of disadvantage, nothing like the tower blocks of Collett or the western suburbs of Sydney, but we do have still some large multi-unit properties which are dominated by public housing tenants, and we don't have a mix. And we find that as the stock's getting older, it's getting harder to maintain and harder to run for the residents, and it's also moving out of alignment with the needs of public housing tenants, in particular people with young children, people who are aged in place, and people with disabilities are not suitable for accommodation in our multi-unit properties. So government made a decision that we'll focus on renewing 13 of our largest public housing multi-unit sites in order to achieve better outcomes for the tenants. We need to make sure that we're focusing on the people who are living in this accommodation and making sure that we get better accommodation for them, and that the process works to support them, since they're some of the most vulnerable and high needs people in our community. These two residents appearing in a video that's been prepared by Housing, talking about how public housing tenants will transition from their older stock into newer stock. Both people have had fairly difficult life experiences that's found them in public housing, and getting better outcomes is important for them. The Renewal Task Force is charged with preparing feasibility studies. In some cases that involves territory plan variations to increase the yield on the sites along bus and transport routes and around group centres and in existing residential areas. To source land for the replacement housing, to undertake construction for that replacement housing and to help work with the Housing ACT in the relocation of public housing tenants. The land will then be passed to the LDA, the government's land sales agent, who will be responsible for the demolition of buildings where that's appropriate, for the preparation of the sales strategy and the sale of the buildings. As I say, we've got a reasonable distribution across the whole of the metropolitan area. It's uneven in some areas, and there's some suburbs that have higher concentrations and some that have lower concentrations, which is largely a reflection of history rather than deliberate policies. The suburbs that have been built when the NCDC was undertaking substantial investment in public housing obviously have more than the public housing program was throttled back at various stages of the NCDC's operations. So we're trying to maintain that spread across the metropolitan area. We think that's important to the character and the culture of the suburb, and we'll want to focus more on buying and acquiring properties and constructing properties in the new greenfields areas to support the housing in the inner suburbs. The housing that we're sourcing at the moment is on land that was available through the Land Development Agency, so it's located primarily close to the urban fringe, and in some cases in greenfields areas. It's spread between North Canberra and South Canberra, and you can see the suburbs there, Moncrief, Amaroo and Nichols in the north, Coonge, Monash and Chisholm in the south. We're currently engaged in a process of calling for expressions of interest from builders and developers who might have development sites and projects that are underway, particularly those that have stalled for want of pre-sales or finance in the current softening of the residential market. That will give us the benefit of having an increased spread of public housing properties, the acquisition of those proposals that come forward that we fit within our model, and that will enable us to offer a wider range of locations to public housing tenants who are being relocated from their existing premises. The expression of interest process closed recently. There were over 17 proposals that we thought had merit and are further investigating, with potential up to 200 residential units. I might say that the challenge for us in terms of the renewal program is to source and construct 1,288 new residential units by the middle of 2019.
Excuse me, David, there was small print at the bottom of that
Yeah.
slide I was just trying to make sense of. So how many units are you talking about in the suburbs, like what? Remaining 936.
Sorry?
It's in the small print at the bottom there.
Ah,
I was trying
yes.
to make sense of that.
Yes, it simply says the remaining 936 homes are likely to be spread across Canberra in suburbs such as Franklin, Throsby, Garland Town Centre, Greenway, Wright, Watson and Chifley. We're still identifying and confirming available sites. So that's a mixture of sites that have been brought forward from the builders and developers who have responded to our expression of interest process, as well as the work that we're doing with the LDA and with the property group to identify land surplus to government needs that might be available for housing.
Do you expect all these people to have cars, or are they going to get somewhere near public transport?
No, we're looking for sites that are on public transport routes. More than 50% of public housing tenants do have cars, so there's a fairly significant car ownership. But the needs of individuals is important to us, and there'll be a relocation plan and a support plan which has been worked out on a one-on-one basis with our staff and the public housing tenants who are being relocated. It's important for us that the public housing fits into the suburbs that are being constructed. It needs to match the look and feel of the local area, and of course, since the raison d'etre for this, the guiding principle is better outcomes for public housing tenants. We're keen to make sure that they are energy efficient, that they are low cost to run, the maintenance costs are reduced, that there is a strong focus on security and safety in the premises, and that we have more flexible housing stock that will allow tenants to age in place and to stay in their accommodation if they suffer from a disability or either temporary or long term. I just included a couple of slides here of recently constructed housing on renewal sites. They were not undertaken by the task force, but they are typical of the public housing that's being built in Canberra at the moment and demonstrates the way in which they'll fit into the suburbs. Both of those are in North Canberra. The first one was in David Street and this one is in Wedge Crescent. There was a question about whether the tenants have cars. It's important, as I said, that we work closely with the tenants and ensure that the move makes sense in terms of their support needs. Many of our tenants use public housing to get over difficult periods in their lives. Many of them will be using the stability that housing forms to be in education or back into employment, or improving the education outcomes for their children, and by that method breaking cycles of unemployment and disadvantage. So the focus, as I say, will be very much on public housing tenants. So I'll move through that very quickly, given the time and the need to leave time for other business, but I'm happy to take any questions.
I just have one question about the elderly. I'm sort of in that category now. With the elderly, often 2 stories, stairs are a challenge.
Yep.
And I was also, even if I was just wondering whether the people like that are catered for, but also as they get even older, then what sort of how do you envisage making a transition to what people would normally do these days? Go into virtually, nursing home or some sort of retirement complex of some kind. So some of your public housing tenants will also get to the point where they can't age in place. catered for people, and there's not, I don't know whether there's much available for people who are on low income to go through a similar process. People who have higher incomes can afford these places.
Yeah. So the first part of your question is about people.
Yeah, who have some sort of disabilities
Yep.
due to age and they can't handle the stairs, and they
Yep.
need one story situation.
Okay, so I'll answer that first and then go on to the second part of the question if you like. The first 6 sites that I showed you were on community facilities land, and the proposal is to make that available for older persons' flats. It'll therefore be dedicated to people who are getting to that point where they need to think about ageing in place. That means that they will be Class C adaptable, that they will be modifiable for people who are in wheelchairs, wider doorways, no thresholds, adjustable bathrooms and kitchen spaces so that people can operate with various levels of disability. So the entirety of that stock will be available for public housing tenants who are older. In terms of our general allocation, our target is between 20 and 50% to be either Class C adaptable or Gold Star livable, which is another accessibility standard that's used, and particularly the ground floor units. So whilst we will be doing some 2-storey townhouses, we'll be focusing on making sure that there's adequate ground floor accommodation for that cohort within the public housing tenants who are ageing. Part of our work involves surveying the residents of the units, of the multi-unit sites that are being redeveloped in order to make sure that the supply of housing matches the demands of those people. Unfortunately, in terms of the second part of your question, whilst housing supports strongly the delivery of services to people who can age in place through the front door services, and their tenancy managers are highly experienced in engaging groups like the home care nursing services and Meals on Wheels to support people in their own home. Residential accommodation for people in nursing homes is a Commonwealth responsibility. It's funded by the Commonwealth by the government, and housing neither has the expertise nor the mandate to be involved in that area, so that won't be included in the redevelopment area. Yeah.
I have a demolition occurring only about 16 metres from my bedroom. When the DA came out for the demolition for the bigger flats, I thought there'd be some mention then there of how the traffic was going to be managed during the demolition. And I was told that my comments on it and the lack of this information were not really acceptable because they don't have a traffic management plan until they have a contract.
Yeah.
And I said, well, do we get any opportunity to consider what the traffic management plan will be? And they said no.
Yeah.
There's no consultation on traffic management. It appears that they're going to make one street one way for the period of the demolition.
Sorry, which street was that?
Cogra Lane.
Ah, yeah.
It appears
Yeah.
on the drawing that it's one way, and there's no mention of how all the garages for Argyle Square that enter off Cogra Lane will be treated during the demolition. Why isn't a traffic management plan part of the DA? That's the question, really. Why is it done afterwards?
Because the contractor has to make decisions about, the contractor has to take responsibility for the safety and the demolition and the management of the site. And so it is his trucks, it's his subcontractors who will be doing that. He's the one who has that authority, and he's the one who will be making application to ACT Roads for those steps. If you're talking about the part of Cogra Lane which backs onto the Reed side, there's no proposal as I'm aware of to close that lane.
That they're going to make it one way?
No, there was no proposal to change the parking arrangements there. I'm not directly responsible for that, it's being handled by the LDA, but I'd be very surprised and would have strong views about that. The only part of Cogra Lane that will be closed will be the area that's adjacent to the current apartments. So the first stage of the demolition
I'm talking about the demolition of the Bega flats DA has come out. The demolition of the one side of Cogra Lane.
The demolition, the DA was applied for at the same time as Currong and Alloa application, but at this stage there's no date for the demolition of those units, and certainly the laneway between Reed and the Bega flats will not be closed for the demolition of Currall.
Yeah, well, Currall's on the other side of Ainsley Avenue.
That's right. So Hogrup will not be closed or subject to changes in traffic arrangements
Until they start demolishing Bega.
until they start to demolish Bega.
Yeah, but they asked for our comments on the demolition of Bega. The DA came out, opened for comments, signs went up, and when you make a comment, you're told, oh, that'll be afterwards. You know, that'll be something you don't have any say in. Traffic management is nothing to do with the residents who are on the other side of the lane.
No, that's too much. That's a bridge too far. We're currently conducting information sessions for the residents in Alloa, Bega, Braddon and Gorman House. We had the first one on Wednesday at lunchtime, and we've got another one tomorrow afternoon after work from 5:30 to 7:30.
So what about the people who live in Argyle Square? They don't get.
There was a gentleman at the back here had a question, so any more questions out here?
There's no consultation sections with us.
We need to, you had a question over there?
Yes.
I'd like to come to a practical problem that we have here. We are all part of the North Canberra area, and I would like, first of all, that I have no objection to or any personal feeling about stopping public housing. In fact, I think it's a necessary part of our community. However, I think most of the people in this room have attended a number of discussions which has involved your section of the government, which was Section 72. And the interesting thing there was that we were faced with another humongous sort of building which we didn't quite understand. It was going to be 6 stories and all that sort of thing. And there was certainly mention of public housing. Now, there was quite a bit of an objection to that at each of those meetings, and I was certainly there, and I think a number of people in this room were also at those meetings. And we were given some assurance that there would be maximum use of what is currently, or was, public use space for public activities, which could include housing for aged. There was all sorts of projections of how it could be integrated into the current North Canberra community. Now, this whole project seems to have gone hot and cold, and now we're talking about nearly 1,000 units required for relocation of public housing. And I would like to state very clearly, there is no objection to public housing, but there was certainly objection on Section 72 to go to a multi-storey type of development. Now, would you like to comment on the situation now in respect to those sections of Section 72, which presumably would be partly used for public housing? I'm sure that we would be supportive of that sort of development, but I think a lot of discussion has already taken place about mixing these places in comfortably with the existing residents.
Yes, so there was discussion, and there was an attempt to reach a consensus with the community about a holistic development of the section.
Yes.
The Economic Development Directorate had difficulty in finding a consensus position, and has taken the decision that they'll step back from the development of the whole of the site and concentrate on the areas that are under the control of the ACT government. And so they've flagged their intention to bring forward a territory plan variation that would allow a broadened range of uses on those sites that are aimed by the ACT government. That information's on the Economic Development Directorate's website, and there's publications that have been distributed in the community. The sites that they're looking at are the Salvation Army site, the former Downer Club,
Yes.
an observatory. This document's out for information to the community. I see that Jane Goplin's got a copy of this, as a number of other people in the room. So those details are available on the website. The address of the website's on the back of the form. Economic development, all one word, .act.gov.au, just what you'd expect. So all that information is available there. But it does mean that it's a much less comprehensive proposal than the one that was discussed with the community when we were looking at a master plan for the whole site.
Any more questions?
So, just to follow up on that, and it was on your earlier slide talking again about the numbers. So you made a comment, we've got 4 years to get over 1,200 units, or is it people relocated? I think one of the slides had 350 and you focused on some of the new greenfields areas to provide for that. But then in the fine print, there's over 900 places to be developed within what looked like a fair few of them were existing areas. Some were new, like Throsby, but some existing areas like Watson. So I've got a question about the density, and is there going to be a bit of a mad panic? So there's not as much thought given to what an ideal density should be for public housing to get the right sort of balance and not a replication of, essentially mega blocks of high densification public housing.
There's certainly not a mad panic, and the intention of coming out and talking to the communities, and we've made presentations to the Joint Council of Community Organisations last weekend, and are making ourselves available to the community through these methods and others, is to make sure that people have got plenty of advice about what the government's intending to do with this public housing.
I came to a few, but I felt like there was a little bit of a blank or a bit of a pushback as to, oh, we don't know, we're just getting ideas, we're still canvassing ideas, and yet there's some pretty clear numbers about what need to be filled within a certain time frame. So
I'm not sure what consultation you were referring to, but in the last 9 months we've completed an agreement with the last 6 months we've completed an agreement with the Commonwealth, which has set out those time frames, and now we're working to that. But we are totally committed to reducing the aggregation of public housing tenants in these 200 odd unit developments like the BAC flats, like Red Hill and Stewart flats and Northbourne Avenue. So we've agreed with housing that the largest developments will be in apartments, that might be more than 1 storey, and that they'll be between 25 and 30 units. So there'll be a lot lower concentration of public housing in individual locations and a more even spread across the territory. And as I say, the first round of the expression of interest to find development sites that are scattered right through the metropolitan area has been quite successful, and we'll probably go to a second round of that expression of interest.
so does that include the 900 figure you talked about? I'm just trying to understand the density. So you talked about the 3.
The 900 will be spread across the metropolitan area, and the fine print, which I read out, and of course this presentation is on our website as well, so you can go and look at all of these drawings. It's just what's left of 1,288 units, given that we've made a commitment to 350 odd. So that's the remnant portion of development. So
if you're having a 300 unit development, are you saying that if 25 of those are housing trust, that's fine? Because you're mixing housing trust in with normal units. That's still a big complex.
No, sorry, I mustn't have been clear enough.
Yes.
We're proposing to build a total of 350 units across those 6 suburbs that I listed. So there's certainly not going to be 350 odd public housing properties in one area.
Yeah, but they're looking at the downer thing here of 200 to 300 units. You're looking at these 2 new sites here and the density of those, but there's hints that there's going to be affordable housing and housing trust units within them, but they're going to be big complexes with total number of units far in excess of 25. You can see what I'm getting at.
Sorry, I can only reiterate, we will not be taking groups of units that are larger than 30, between 25 and 30. So if the rest of the site's developed with other residential accommodation, that's good. We don't want to see public housing isolated. We want to see it mixed in with the community. But the amount of public housing in any one apartment block.
Yeah, so it can still be a 300 unit complex, but scattered 25 within it, so it's still a big complex.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the task force is not driving the size of the complexes. If there's
Yeah, you're just, I know,
Yeah, but
I know what you're doing.
I think we need to take a step back because all of these consultation processes are really fraught. I went to a couple of the Section 72s. There's been people phoning up the radio station, there's been letters to the editor, and they're all very similar in tone. We can go to these things, we can have our say about whether we want another footpath and what colour the paving brick should be, but thou shalt not challenge the underlying premises on which the development is based. Now, that was absolutely classic in Section 72. Section 72 had originally had a purpose within the community. Someone came in and said, well, we're not going to do that anymore, we're going to have all of this new stuff, and it's all much bigger, and it's all wonderful. Now, we can comment on bits and pieces of it, but we could not say, hang on, that whole idea is rotten, go away. We're not allowed to challenge the underlying premises, and when you have consultation, there's no mechanisms to make sure that the consulted comments actually happen. There's no mechanism to have a mandatory requirement to take notice, especially when the original premises are not acceptable. They're wrong. You can't challenge them. What's going on?
This is not necessarily under your...
No.
It's
It's broader than you, I
I think it's broader, and I agree with what you're saying, but I'm not sure that it's fair to put all that onto you.
I'm not responsible for that decision making, but I am representing the government here, so I will answer. I mean, the proposal which is now on the website that's been discussed is substantially different to the proposal that was taken to the community, both inside in terms of the amount of space that's being rezoned and the scale of the redevelopment. So from that point of view, the consultation as I read it was effective, and the changes have been made that are consistent with the community's views. But I guess
None of that happened, I'm sure. None of it happened. Nothing happened.
Two boxes,
Jane?
it decided to do what it wanted to on a two box
They'll
lot.
do it
Development
when you
has
start.
changed.
Jane?
You mentioned the scale of the development has changed. I'm curious, there was a figure of 150 units by 2018 in the land release program. That figure is now 200 units. And yet, I think it was Louise Gilding from the ODA is quoted in the paper saying that there was a figure of 850 units, which we really couldn't understand. Where did that 850 come from?
I don't know. I mean, I've answered what I could. I've got some material to show you, and you've got that material as well. It's on the website. I wasn't part of the original proposal for Section 72, so where that higher number came from, I do not know.
Can I just ask a general question about whole of government data, information, evidence or whatever? Does the government keep updating statistics on the number of homeless people and then on the number of people who have actually succeeded in getting social housing, the number of people on the waiting list, and also to some extent the funding of the support? Because I think if one visits people with high needs in social housing, often it's not so much the building that they need support for, it's their life situation and many other complex needs. And it's often hard to integrate the number of agencies that they access, particularly high needs families that often have half a dozen agencies all coming there for various reasons. And what concerns me is that if we simply focus on the built environment and we don't actually spend time with the people, then, you know, we're spending money but we're not necessarily improving outcomes in people's lives.
I think that's a very good point, and to the extent there's a question inherent in it, it's a very good question.
I don't
Housing,
think it's easy.
it's not easy. I mean, we're housing those people who are having the most difficulty of anyone in our community, which is why I took the step of putting up a couple of case studies, as it were, just to acknowledge that we're focused very much on housing. ACT keep very accurate figures on the use of homelessness services. They have a centralised process so that people who are coming looking for support who are homeless come in through a central access point and are able to access the full range of accommodation and support services that are available. And housing works closely with those agencies that provide that additional support that so many of them require. So whether it's the Canberra Men's Centre dealing with people who've been in the AMC Centre and moving back into the community, whether it's Schizophrenia Australia and other groups who support people with mental health issues or problems, or whether it's the general services that are provided by the Northside Community Services, who support many of our tenants as well. The broadly based human services that are embodied in the Community Services Directorate, which includes disability and the Office of Children and Young People, as well as public housing, is another attempt to sort of focus on the whole picture. And we've tried to integrate closely with the non-government sector as well, and had good success, for instance, with the Common Ground facility that we just completed in Gungahlin, which is 40 units, half of which are available to people coming out of primary homelessness, half of which are available for people on low incomes, on affordable. So it's not easy, it's challenging, but efforts are being made, and it remains a focus both for the task force and for housing.
Just one very quick supplementary is domestic violence with women, particularly women with children, puts a lot of stress on them and everybody else. And with the concern about violence, is there sort of a bit of a special effort made to see if, whether they're refuges or some other ways of addressing that issue? It's part of the general problem of high needs people.
Very much so, and it won't surprise you therefore to know that there's a MOU between the Community Services Directorate, Housing, ACT and the domestic violence refuges, which means that there's a streamlined process for moving people onto the transfer list. There's improved security, there's safeguarding privacy in terms of areas that people are relocated to. There's a waiver of tenant responsible damage where it's been done by an abusing partner.
Yep.
So there's a range of those things.
Thank you.
Just to finish up on that, for each of the tenants that are relocated, our staff will be sitting down with housing and with the tenant on a one-on-one basis, not only looking at what their locational needs are, what their accommodation needs are, but also developing a support plan for each of them. So we'll have a good idea of what supports they're accessing through non-government organisations and others, and we'll be focusing on what they need to make sure that those supports go with them or can be replaced. And obviously that's a challenge in this early stage where so much of our stuff is in the newer suburbs, where community services and supports are still embryonic, if you like, and still developing. So we're doing a lot of work on that as well.
Thank you.
I suggest we finish up there and thank David for his presentation.